A little bit of history and a little bit of where we're going on 38 Studios tonight. Welcome into my state of mind. I am Dan Yorke, and you're catching me hook up. You know why? Because I forgot to put my earpiece in, and when that happens, you know what? You have no idea. You think you had a hard week? I had a pretty difficult one, but there I can. Now everything is clear, audibly, visually. Thanks for your patience with me. I really appreciate you watching here on MyRI TV at 7:30 and 11:30, and again on Fox Providence each and every midnight. We're pretty casual here, obviously. 38 Studios is a conversation that is now repercolated because the documents have been dropped in the civil litigation between the state and the defendants who brought us this wonderful debacle of $75 million in principal loss, $100 million with interest payments due based on a company that went defunct. And now that everyone's kind of reinvested in this, the media is reinvested and all that, I think it's kind of important to kind of still tell at least one aspect of how the story started, now that we're learning more things about the documents and what they tell us. And a little bit later on, we'll meet a local resident in Cumberland who got enough attention that the speaker actually responded to him in terms of what we should do going forward. Here's the headline that we begin with, though, this evening. Former lawmaker says 38 Studios documents prove he was duped. Well, you know what the truth of the matter is? The whole doggone legislature, minus a couple, were actually duped. Former State Representative John Brien is my guest. Long time no see, buddy. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Dan. Good to be back.
Good to see you. You lost an election in 2012. The opponent beat you over the head with 38 Studios. And in a way, you may have been an innocent victim in all of this. At least that's how you perceive it, and I might just buy into that argument. Tell the story of what happened. You were an original sponsor of the legislation that created the $125 million loan guarantee program, which was the financial backing and basis for the 38 Studios situation. But you had no idea that 38 Studios was in the mix.
That's correct.
Explain how that could have possibly happened.
Okay, so I'm going to start here and say, first of all, I was a sponsor of a $50 million loan guarantee program. And that happened to my great surprise. At the time, I was an outsider. I was someone, I hadn't voted for Speaker Fox, and Speaker Fox had just taken over during a mid-year election, and I voted for the rep from North Providence. So I was really on the outs. So I had been working on an economic development bill for a number of years. It was a good piece of legislation. It was a proven model in other states to help Rhode Island businesses bid on, win, and comply with federal contracts. Chairman Constantino walks up to me one day, much to my surprise, because those guys didn't talk to me much, and said, "Hey, we know you've been working on that bill for a few years. It's a good bill. We decided we're going to pass it. We're going to attach it to this bill. We're going to make it a part of a EDC package. Why don't you read it and sign on to it? But we're putting it in today." And I said, "Well, I got to read it first." So I go back to my desk. This is in the back of the room. I don't know what the hell is going on at this point. They're going to pass my bill and they want me to sign on to another one? How can this be? I couldn't got a bill that passed that said today was Friday, Dan. Okay? So I'm at my desk, I read the bill, and they said, "Well, you gotta let us know today, so we're putting it in today." So I said, "Well, this looks good." I mean, in theory, it was good. It was a good piece of legislation. I mean, it was well intended, but the road to hell is paved with good intention. So I signed the bill, I give it to the chairman, and I said, "Well, who else is gonna be on this?" And he said, "Me, Vice Chair Mello, and you." How the hell did this happen? So the bill comes up. There's a couple amendments to the bill. I speak. Constantino lets me speak to my amendment, which is attaching my entire piece of legislation onto that. I was really surprised, and I was like, this is great. And then the second amendment came, let's expand it by $75 million. And then he's peppered with questions. Chairwoman Macbeth says to him, right on the floor, "Is this for one company?" Answer, no. So when the chairman of finance says that in front of the House members and on TV to the rest of Rhode Island, I believed him. Does that make me dumb or naive? I don't know. But I believed the veracity of the statement.
So you
it was pretty public.
An idea, you had a specific target for $50 million. Instead, what you did was you signed a hybrid bill that used $50 million. You were signing a $50 million project to have loan guarantees. and what people need to understand about a loan guarantee, it's a cosign in a way. It's like when your kid's going to buy a car and they don't have any money, you don't ever expect to make the payment, but you back up the so that's what the loan guarantee was. Instead, $75 million more gets thrown on top of it, and you're thinking, holy cow, I couldn't get $50 million going. In fact, twice it had, the year before, and in recent proximity to this night, 50 didn't make it, but all of a sudden now it's $1.25.
Suddenly it's a really good idea.
So you're thinking, holy cow, they must have had a V8. Now they're going to help, what, 100 companies or whatever throughout the state of Rhode Island.
They could have helped a lot. Yeah, it could have been small.
Bob Watson made a speech and a half, though, about how this was a really dangerous situation. Did that cause you any pause?
I have to be honest. I mean,
the lone Republican that made the big speech.
I still remember his speech because he used the word skullduggery, and you don't hear that word every day. So that's how I remembered it. And I said, you know, Bob could give some really good impassioned speeches, but he gave those speeches on everything. So while, yes, it was an impassioned speech on this bill, he gave those on literally, if it was a charter change for the town of Cumberland, he would give an impassioned speech and then vote against it. So after a while, you know, you start to get used to that kind of objection.
Interestingly, but you know, so I'll tell you though, maybe it might have been a boy crying wolf for you, but somehow he figured out, and we've had him on here to try to explain it. I can't get out of him exactly what he knew, when, how, but he looked like you know, Karnak the Magnificent with the predictions of everything that happened here. But the bottom line here, before we bring out our next guest to join you in this conversation, the bottom line here is that you had an interest in economic development in a time when we were really in bad shape in 2010. You signed on to a bill in a surprise moment, and the intent did not match what was described to you.
Absolutely not. And before I knew it, 2 years later, there's a mail piece out that shows me basically handing the big lottery check to Kurt Schilling for $75 million of the taxpayers' dollars. I don't even know how the hell that happened. And
you narrowly lost the 2012 race because of it.
Yeah.
All right. When we come back, a gentleman who has been really working the Speaker hard on the kind of hearings that we should have, and the Speaker actually reacted. Stay with us.
It has been, continues to be active. We are looking at what was released recently by order of Judge Silverstein, in order of, by the way, which I supported the release of those documents. We will compare them to what we have, but at this point in time, I will say I don't think there was any great surprise in what was released to us.
It was a very discouraging comment I thought the Attorney General made. He's talking about investigations this week when he was caught outside another event. He's hardly held a press event on 38 Studios, and his focus has been as nonchalant as any public official I've ever seen, never mind a law enforcement officer whose responsibility it is to bring us the truth on this kind of stuff. Joining John Brien, our former state representative from Woonsocket, is Brien Kelly, who does not have an elected office.
Not anymore.
No. Were you a school committee guy in Cumberland?
In Cumberland.
Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you. You know John.
We do.
You got a reaction from the House Speaker this week. Jess, can we put that headline up? This is what it looked like. At least this is the narrative. No, not that one. The other one. Each one of these guys has their own headline, interestingly enough. Nick Mattiello, House plans oversight hearings on 38 Studios. Inside that story, the Speaker of the House responded to your ideas / criticism of what's being discussed about hearings on 38 Studios. Tell me what your thought process is.
Well, I think from me, looking at it from the average person, from the outside, I think that the feeling is that there is no trust of the citizens, of individuals at the State House. And I think that they want an independent set of eyes to look at this. And this thing is dragged on for so long. And in my opinion, Speaker Mattiello has shown no leadership on this issue. He has been all over the place when it comes to having an investigation by the House Oversight. You know, it started with Speaker Fox when Speaker Fox appointed Representative Marcello to oversight, but didn't give him subpoena powers. But now we can look back and understand why it is at Fox.
And co-chairing the original paper-pushing oversight committee, and there has been one, folks, if you haven't been paying attention. It did its work, what, last year, and a little, what was the time frame on that? It was...
So the first one was 2013,
yeah.
I think.
And Karen Macbeth, the representative from Cumberland, was involved in that. We had her here talking about it. You were a supporter of Macbeth. You've gone south on her, correct?
Yep.
Why?
I think just friendships take different directions.
Is it a personal thing or is it a political thing?
Well, I think now it's become both.
Well, what is it? Spit it out. Why are you no longer supporting her? Because she's going back into the saddle for the next set of oversight hearings.
Yeah.
And I want to get your perspective
I think
on
some
this.
of the votes that she's taken, not votes I would have taken, and I think if somebody's going to vote that way, I can't in good
All right, so
faith.
your criticism of her is not on 38.
Well, it's part of it. And I think part of it is how
it?
she's handled her position as chair.
Meaning?
I myself would have used that as a bully pulpit. If Mattiello didn't give me subpoena powers, I don't care if I'm the only person sitting at an oversight hearing. I'm going to be there with the press because somebody has to show leadership on this issue to get the answers out.
Okay, so while she was viewed as tough by some, you didn't think she was tough enough in the last go around, and she should be asking for subpoena power, which is not just looking at documents, but saying, hey, you get in here, sit down, and answer some questions. How do you feel about the whole oversight process and the hearing process, John, as a former rep?
I mean, she's been a pretty loud advocate for getting subpoena power for her committee. You know, the committee process is one that if she was, and as a former legislator I can say this, if she was out there saying, in a room by herself saying, well, I want subpoena power, and as that continued, she wouldn't be the chairwoman too much longer. I mean, that's just the way that it is. So I think that she's trying to work within the framework that's made available to her. I find that she's been quite aggressive on this issue. And I would like to see subpoena powers granted to the Oversight Committee so that they're not just looking at documents. And I think that they could make a whole lot of headway. I mean, to the extent that Speaker Mattiello has said that it's a legislative and not an investigative body, to some extent that's true, but there is investigative powers that, you know, that the House does have should they choose to exercise. And ultimately, that's their call.
Right, because when I called him out last year. I wanted him to be the first to testify in front of House Oversight. His response to me, he didn't know anything about 38 studios. Well, that's fine, but I was looking more towards somebody to show
Well, he could
leadership.
come and say it and establish that there's at least a track of testimony.
And then it opens the door for other people to show up in front of House Oversight to get on the record what it is they knew and what they didn't know. And at the time, as you just said, he said, investigators investigate, legislators legislate. Well, now he's come full circle and said, we're going to investigate.
Yeah, well, I think there's been a lot of pressure. I know, you know, from my bully pulpit, I've been pounding the speaker for hearings, and also the governor. We'll talk about her in a second, and they may be able to simultaneously attack this thing. We had a lull in the attention on 38 studios until this deposition drop finally occurred in the civil litigation that the state has got going against these defendants, trying to get some. We've got some tens of millions of dollars back, but not nearly enough based on the principal and interest payments. What we've learned here through the documents and through some of the journalism is that former Speaker Gordon Fox clearly knew what he was up to in getting a $75 million deal. Stephen Constantino, the gentleman you referred to, who asked you to sign on to legislation, John, clearly knew what this is all about, although he's in a job in Vermont right now, hiding from everybody and not telling any, and his depositions are all, I can't remember. Reflection on that, do you think there were any other players in the legislative leadership or on the House floor that knew it was in the hopper?
It's clear from the documents that those two guys knew, and Chairman Constantino has been MIA ever since this all began. Look, I can remember certain inane votes I took, testimony I gave, testimony from others. So to say that I don't recall over and over, that's just not credible. I mean, it's just not. Do I think others were involved? I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, obviously it has to happen at the very top. And at the time, like I said, I was on the out. So they wouldn't be talking to guys like me. You know, the guys that were, and I know at the time, they felt, Gordon Fox felt as though Nick Mattiello was put upon him as part of the deal to get the speakership. So he was largely cut out. And the vibe on the floor at the time was largely, you know, the Speaker and the Majority Leader really aren't working together, and he was really just
Which is
more
probably true because I recall knowing that Speaker Mattiello, I'm sorry, the Majority Leader, then Majority Leader Mattiello, literally had a campaign running against him in Cranston, sponsored by Fox and some of his allies. I know that was some of the behind-the-scenes politics. So, but here's what I don't get. There's two cement heads in this entire process. The Speaker of the House, who's had to be dragged kicking and screaming to even the notion of a subpoena, and the Attorney General, who we just saw, who has played the worst law enforcement role I've ever seen. The first thing he should have done, as a guy who voted just like you did as a pedestrian lawmaker on this bill, he should have recused himself on day one just to give the public a good feeling that there'll be no shenanigans. It's not even germane whether they were corrupt and collusionary in this thing. You just need an appearance thing for the state. Am I missing something?
Right, and that is the only way that the state's going to move on. You know, Governor Raimondo can say we have to move on past 38 studios. We can't move on until we know what happens. And for some of the things that happen, like the stadium, the toll plan, the people in the average person in the public look at these things with distrust because they don't know what happened over here with 38 studios. So why would they have any trust in our public officials to go forward? Now, this state has now delayed recovery in meaningful recovery in the economy for 2-3 years now because we haven't got to the truth, and the public won't sign on to other projects because they don't have the truth.
I agree with that. I think sunlight's the best disinfectant, and I think that the only way that we're going to get past the proverbial collective 38 studios hangover is to give the public what they want, and the public wants a pound of flesh, and you know what? They paid for it.
All right. Well, it seems like you already gave your pound. We come back. Predictions on where this thing is going. Stay with us.
You know, frequently when someone comes forth with a new idea, say, oh, well, we can't do that because of 38 studios. Oh, that's another 38 studios. We can't do that.
Well, you know, that's what Brien was speaking to in our last segment. The governor has this misimpression that we can wish the angst of this dilemma away. It's 5 years too long, or at least 3 or 4 years too long. We should have had a legislative contingent that was so angry about what they passed on a stealth basis that they wanted pounds of flesh from the leadership. Why didn't that happen? Why didn't that happen? I
think ultimately...
Why didn't you scream from the top of your lungs? It might have saved your 2012 election. You might have looked like somebody who had proof that he was duped. I believe your story completely, but you weren't in a position, or didn't put yourself in a position to say, hey, of course, you know, the whole thing came tumbling down, what, the company came tumbling down in 2012, somewhat commensurate to when you were running for re-election.
Correct. Yeah. And so the only thing I could do was, you know, I didn't do it. But in politics, perception is reality.
Why weren't you screaming for the leadership to do its job, the likes of which Brien is asking for, which was hearings, subpoenas, cleanse us, shine the light?
Look, the reality is that, you know, my opponents and his benefactors, they saw an opening, and when they spend tens of thousands of dollars on mailers saying that, you know, I gave the money to Kurt Schilling, it's hard to beat that. So no matter what I said, it was, look.
Well, forget your election.
But what else could I have done after that?
Every one of the lemmings in the legislature has rolled over and said, I don't nothing. And the people who've run and been in their sins say, it wasn't my place, I wasn't there. Rather than having the fortitude to say, and the understanding to say, we can't move forward in the state until we get that pound of flesh and we tell the story in full and package it and put it away. Don't you subscribe to that now, right?
Of course I do. Who doesn't?
And what should have happened...
Well, why is it taking so long?
But you're exactly right. What should have happened is that putting the speaker aside, 74 members should have gone up and screamed. And if it cost the speaker his position, that's what should have been the cost to the speaker for not following what the 74 reps wanted.
That the speaker now is saying, okay, hearings, and whatever fledgling way he puts that together. You actually are saying, what? You don't want want reps to run hearings.
I'm not saying the rank and file reps were involved, But I'm looking at it from the average person. I don't trust anything that goes down there regarding
So
this
you
situation.
want an outside
I
player?
want outside, an
Like a
independent prosecutor or something. Like I mentioned.
Did you mention Doherty?
I mentioned Brendan Doherty.
Brendan Doherty, Colonel Doherty.
Somebody who has a reputation.
On behalf of the legislature, or separately from the legislature?
I don't care who appoints
See,
them.
I think the legislature needs to establish that it can police itself.
And I agree with that. I mean, I think that, maybe this is Pollyannish of me, but I actually have still some faith in our elected leaders that you can, and there are good people in that room, okay, that you can find. And if you have to find people that, and the turnover has been really high, so I'm sure you can find people in that room that didn't vote on that bill back in 2010. And if that's what it takes to get them on, but it takes someone like Chairwoman Macbeth to be the chair of that committee, and I do have full faith in her because she asked the right questions on that day. Did she ultimately vote for it? Yes. So did I. So did everybody else. But I know that her intent is in the right place.
And I think based on what we know now, we'll judge the hearings based on the veracity of the interrogatory, right?
I've been dying to be subpoenaed, but no one wants to talk to me.
But we all know what goes on at the
You're
State
here.
House.
What?
I mean, we all know what goes on at the State House. 14 members of that oversight, 7 were there, 7 voted yes. Even if you put all 14 there who weren't there in 2010, in the future, they all want legislative grants. They all want leadership positions or keep on their leadership positions. They want legislation to be passed and not held for further study. It's a whole game that goes on down there that the people are tired of.
But you just said it perfectly, Brian. The people are tired of it. So ultimately, they're watching this process, and they'll vote at the ballot box. At least you hope they will.
But this economy can't wait for the ballot box. This economy needs answers now. And if that means that you get the answers now and you have to purge some people in the House or take people down from leadership positions, whoever they may, that's what has to be done.
Well, it's October. It's going to be here in 9 months. So, I mean, elections are coming.
This is before Dan's time. We lived through RISDIC, all right?
And incidentally, the House used its investigative powers during that time.
Right. So at the end of the day, it seems like we'll have hearings when we get into 2016. I don't know if they're going to be, I mean, it's almost 2016 as we speak. We got 3 more months. It'll run into a local election year anyway. So it's going to be fascinating. You going to run again?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, I enjoy
You're
life too.
happy.
I'm enjoying life too much.
All right. And you have no political interest, do you, in the state rep seat? You're just talking as a citizen, correct?
Yes.
All right. You don't have to whisper that.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
I appreciate your vigilance as a citizen. I appreciate your candor as a rep. I hope that we get some vigilance and candor macro in this process, including an investigation from A, the legislature, but B, the state police. They're taking notes. And by the way, we don't have to wait for the state police. This is the other thing. The state police, don't need to supersede. The state police can take notes on civil documents, on legislative documents. They run at their own speed.
I'm hopeful that this matter will ultimately be sorted out in the courts or at the ballot box. But, I mean, as I said, people need to get past this. The only way they get past this is by feeling some justice was met.
All right. Listen, guys, appreciate it. Thank you. Final word coming up. Stay with us. So the show takes an original week off next week due to some production behind-the-scenes stuff. So here's what we're going to do. On the Monday program coming up, we'll replay Bob Watson's conversation, the state representative who knew more about 38 studios than anybody else seemed to. We'll try to drag some answers out of him. We had that conversation a couple of weeks ago. It's worth seeing again. And then some great highlight shows from the recent past all next week. We'll see you on the radio as well on Monday, live at noon on WPRO. Have a great weekend.